I never thought that giving away my last $3 to a crying stranger outside a grocery store would change my entire life. But that's exactly what happened on that cold November afternoon in 1987. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 73 years old now, but when this story begins, I was 68, a widow living alone in a small apartment in downtown Chicago. My husband Robert had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving me with nothing but memories and a modest pension that barely covered rent and groceries. That particular Tuesday, I had just finished my weekly shopping. The wind was biting, and I wrapped my thin coat tighter around my shoulders as I stepped out of the supermarket. That's when I saw him, a young Asian man, maybe in his early 30s, sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. He was dressed in a fine dark suit that seemed too expensive for someone sitting on a dirty sidewalk, but what caught my attention were his shoulders, shaking with silent sobs. I've always been the kind of person who can't walk past suffering. It's a blessing and a curse, my Robert used to say. I approached the young man slowly, setting my grocery bag down beside him. "Excuse me, son," I said softly. "Wait, are you all right?" He looked up at me, and I saw his face was wet with tears. His eyes were red and swollen, filled with a pain so deep it made my heart ache. He tried to compose himself, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry," he said in accented English. "I shouldn't be here like this." "Nonsense," I told him. "We all have our moments. What's troubling you?" He shook his head. "My mother. She passed away this morning. I just came from the hospital. I couldn't go home yet. I needed a moment. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly means more than you can imagine." My own mother had died when I was young, so I understood that particular kind of grief. I reached into my purse and pulled out the 3 $1 bills I had left. My food money until my next pension check arrived in 3 days. "Here," I said, pressing the bills into his hand. "Go get yourself something warm to drink. And don't be sad. Your mother wouldn't want to see you suffering like this." He stared at the money in his palm, then at me, his expression unreadable. "I can't take this," he said. "You can, and you will," I insisted. Consider it a gift from a mother who knows what it's like to lose someone. What I didn't know then was that this simple act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would save my life, and cost me everything I thought I knew about the world. The young man stood up, towering over me. He was tall, well-built, with a presence that suddenly seemed much larger than his grief. He looked at the $3 again, then at me, and something shifted in his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. "Margaret Hayes," I told him. "And you?" "Jin," he said simply. "Jin Park." He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect that seemed both formal and deeply sincere. "Mrs. Hayes, I will never forget this. Never. Just take care of yourself, Jin," I said, picking up my grocery bag. "And remember, grief passes, but love remains." He watched me walk away, and I could feel his eyes on my back the entire time. I didn't think much of it then. I'd helped a stranger in pain, that's all. I went home to my small apartment, made myself a simple dinner of canned soup and bread, and went to bed thinking about my own late husband. But 3 days later, everything changed. I woke up that Friday morning to find an envelope had been slipped under my door. Inside was $500 in cash and a note written in careful handwriting. "For the kindest woman in Chicago. J. P." My hands trembled as I counted the bills. $500. I sat down hard on my worn sofa, my mind racing. This was more money than I'd seen at one time since Robert's funeral insurance payout, but I couldn't accept it. It was too much, too generous. I spent the morning trying to find Jin Park. I went back to the grocery store, asked the manager if he'd seen a young Korean man in a suit. Nothing. No one knew anything. It was as if he'd vanished. That evening, I used some of the money to buy a proper dinner, a small roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, even a slice of apple pie from the bakery. I told myself I'd find a way to return the rest. But then things got stranger. A week later, my landlord, Mr. Morrison, knocked on my door with the oddest expression on his face. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, clearing his throat nervously, "I've been instructed to inform you that your rent has been paid in full for the next year." "What? By whom?" "I don't know," he said, looking uncomfortable. "A man came to my office yesterday with cash. He didn't give a name, just said it was for apartment 3B and left." My heart started pounding. What did he look like? Asian fellow, young, well-dressed, very polite, but Morrison paused. There was something about him, something that made me not want to ask questions. Jin. It had to be Jin. But why? What kind of man pays a stranger's rent for an entire year because she gave him $3? I was about to find out that Jin Park wasn't just any man, and my simple act of kindness had put me on the radar of someone very powerful and very dangerous. Over the next month, strange things kept happening. My mailbox would occasionally contain envelopes with cash, never more than $100 at a time, always with the same initials, J.P. My electricity bill was mysteriously paid in advance. When my refrigerator broke down, a brand new one appeared at my door with a note. Every mother deserves fresh food. I tried to refuse these gifts. I really did. But the delivery men would just smile and say they had strict instructions, and there was no return address to send anything back to. I felt uncomfortable accepting such generosity, but I was also, if I'm being honest, relieved. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about making ends meet. Then one December evening, I discovered the truth about Jin Park. I was watching the evening news, a cup of tea cooling in my hands, when the reporter's words made me freeze. Chicago police have arrested 3 members of the notorious Park crime family in connection with illegal gambling operations in Chinatown. Authorities say they're getting closer to the organization's leader, Jin Park, a Korean immigrant believed to control much of the city's underground economy. The cup slipped from my fingers, shattering on the floor. The screen showed a photograph, a surveillance photo, grainy and unclear, but unmistakable. It was him, my Jin, the grieving son I'd comforted outside the grocery store. The young man who'd cried on the sidewalk was a crime boss, the head of the Korean Mafia. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I cleaned up the broken cup. All those gifts, all that money, it was from illegal activities, from violence and crime and God knows what else. I felt sick to my stomach. What had I done? What kind of world had I stumbled into? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should go to the police. But what would I tell them? That a mob boss was paying my rent because I gave him $3? They'd think I was senile. More importantly, I was terrified. I'd seen enough movies to know what happened to people who crossed organized crime. I was a 70-something widow living alone. I had no protection, no family to turn to. So I made a decision that would haunt me for months to come. I did nothing. I kept quiet, accepted the gifts when they came, and tried to live as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And I was about to learn that in Jin Park's world, there was no such thing as a simple act of kindness. Everything had a price. Everything had consequences. And somewhere in the shadows of Chicago's underworld, those consequences were already coming for me. Winter settled over Chicago like a cold blanket. I went about my life trying to pretend everything was normal, but paranoia had become my constant companion. Every time I left my apartment, I felt watched. Every stranger on the street might be connected to Jin Park's organization. Every car that passed too slowly made my heart race. The gifts stopped coming in January. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe Jin had forgotten about me, moved on to other concerns. But then I realized that the silence was worse than the gifts. At least when the envelopes appeared, I knew where I stood. Then came the night that changed everything. It was February 3rd, a Friday evening. I'd been to my weekly bingo game at the church basement, one of the few social activities I still allowed myself. Mrs. Chen had won the jackpot, $42, and we'd all celebrated with cookies and coffee. I walked home around 9 o'clock, my purse clutched tightly to my side. The streetlights on my block were out. Not unusual in that neighborhood, but it made me nervous. I hurried toward my building, my breath forming white clouds in the freezing air. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate, getting closer. I walked faster, my heart hammering. The footsteps matched my pace. I could see my building entrance just 30 feet away, but it felt like miles. Mrs. Hayes? The voice was male, unfamiliar, with no accent I could place. I stopped, my hand digging in my purse for my keys. "Don't turn around," the voice said. "Just listen." I stood frozen on the sidewalk, terrified. "Mr. Park wants you to know you're in danger. There are people who know about his generosity toward you. People who want to hurt him by hurting you. You need to leave Chicago. Tonight." "I don't understand." I whispered. I haven't done anything wrong. You showed kindness to the wrong person at the wrong time, the man said. Mr. Park's enemies see you as leverage. They think you're important to him. They're planning to take you. My legs almost gave out. Take me. Why? I'm nobody. In Mr. Park's world, everyone is somebody if they can be used. There was a pause. I'm leaving an envelope on the bench behind you. Inside is $5,000 and a bus ticket to Seattle. There's a woman there, Grace Kim, who runs a boarding house. She'll take care of you. You leave tonight, or by tomorrow, you might not have a choice. But my apartment, my things, your life, Mrs. Hayes, that's what matters. You have 30 minutes to pack what you can carry. I'll be watching to make sure you make it to the bus station safely. After that, you disappear. Do you understand? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Good. Mr. Park said to tell you. He's sorry. He never meant for his world to touch yours. The footsteps retreated into the darkness, and I was alone again with a terrible choice. I stood on that dark street for what felt like an eternity, my mind reeling. Run away. Leave everything I'd built in Chicago for the past 40 years. Leave the church where Robert and I were married, the apartment where we'd spent our happiest years together, the neighborhood I knew like the back of my hand. But what choice did I have? If what that man said was true, and the fear in my bones told me it was, then staying meant danger I couldn't even imagine. I made it to the bench, grabbed the envelope with shaking hands, and hurried into my building. The elevator seemed to take forever. When I finally got to my apartment, I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and collapsed against the wall, sobbing. After several minutes, I forced myself to stand. I had 30 minutes, maybe less. I pulled out my old brown suitcase from the closet, the one Robert and I had used on our honeymoon to Niagara Falls. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely zip it open. What do you pack when you're fleeing your entire life? Clothes. I grabbed practical things, warm sweaters, 2 pairs of pants, underwear, my thick winter coat, my medication for blood pressure, my glasses, the photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day, my mother's pearl necklace, the only thing of value I owned. I looked around the apartment one last time. The worn sofa where Robert used to read his newspapers, the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals, the window where I'd watched the seasons change over the city skyline. All of it, left behind because I'd given $3 to a stranger. The bus ticket was for 11:30 p.m. It was already 10:15. I had to move. I grabbed my suitcase and purse, took one last look at apartment 3B, and walked out. I didn't lock the door behind me. What was the point? I wouldn't be coming back. The street was still dark when I emerged from the building. A taxi was waiting at the curb, its engine running. The driver was an older black man with kind eyes. "Bus station?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. We drove through the city streets in silence. I watched Chicago pass by the window, the buildings I knew, the corners I'd walked, the life I was leaving behind. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't make a sound. At the station, the driver refused my money. "Already paid for, ma'am. You take care of yourself now." I walked into the Greyhound terminal feeling like a ghost. The bus to Seattle was already boarding. I showed my ticket, climbed aboard, and found a seat near the back. As the bus pulled out of Chicago, I pressed my face against the cold window and watched the city lights fade into darkness. I had escaped, but I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was running from something I'd never truly understand, toward a future I couldn't imagine. And in my heart, I knew this wasn't over. The bus ride to Seattle took 2.5 days, with stops in small towns whose names I barely registered. I slept in fits and starts, jerking awake at every stop, terrified that someone would board the bus looking for me. I barely ate, just nibbled on crackers I bought at rest stops, my stomach too twisted with anxiety to handle anything more. The other passengers kept to themselves, which suited me fine. I wasn't ready to talk, wasn't ready to explain why a 70-something woman was fleeing across the country with nothing but a single suitcase. I thought about Jin Park constantly. Had he really sent that warning to save me? Or was this all part of some larger game I couldn't understand? The man on the street had said Jin's enemies saw me as leverage, which meant Jin must have shown enough concern for my welfare that others noticed. But why? I'd given him $3 and a few kind words. That was all. How had such a small gesture created this massive upheaval in my life? The landscape changed as we traveled west. The flat plains of the Midwest gave way to mountains, forests, and finally, the Pacific coast. When we crossed into Washington state, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. I was far from Chicago now, but I was also far from everything I'd ever known. The bus pulled into Seattle's station on Monday morning, just after dawn. The city was gray and drizzly, so different from Chicago's sharp winter cold. I stepped off the bus with my suitcase, looking around at a place I'd never been before and might now have to call home. The envelope had contained an address along with the money and bus ticket. Grace Kim's boarding house was in a neighborhood called Wallingford. I took a taxi, another expense from my dwindling cash, and watched the unfamiliar streets pass by. The boarding house was a large, old Victorian home painted pale yellow with white trim. It looked welcoming, grandmotherly even, which made me relax slightly. I paid the taxi driver and stood on the sidewalk, gathering my courage. Before I could knock, the door opened. A Korean woman in her 50s stood there, wearing an apron and a warm smile. You must be Margaret," she said. "I've been expecting you. Come in out of the rain." Grace Kim ushered me inside with such natural warmth that I almost burst into tears right there in her foyer. The house smelled like fresh bread and coffee, homey and safe. "How did you know I was coming?" I asked. Grace's smile dimmed slightly. "Jin called me 3 days ago. He said you needed a place to stay, somewhere quiet and safe. He said you were a good woman who'd been kind to him when he needed it most." "You know Jin?" "He's my nephew," Grace said simply, "and we need to talk." Grace led me to a comfortable living room with floral wallpaper and overstuffed furniture. She poured me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me, her expression serious. "I imagine you have many questions," she said. "Your nephew is a criminal," I blurted out. "I saw it on the news. The police are looking for him." Grace nodded slowly. "Yes, Jin has made choices I don't agree with, but he's still my sister's son, and I know his heart isn't as dark as his actions might suggest. He runs the Mafia," I said, my voice rising. "How can you defend that?" "I'm not defending it," Grace said calmly. "I'm explaining it. Jin came to America when he was 16, after his father was murdered in Seoul. My sister brought him here hoping for a new start, but the streets of Chicago aren't kind to immigrants with nothing. Jin fell in with the wrong people, and by the time he realized what he was becoming, it was too late to turn back." She poured herself coffee, her hands steady even as mine shook. "His mother, my sister, died of cancer last November. She was the only person who could reach the good part of him anymore. When she passed, something in Jin broke. He told me he sat outside a grocery store crying, feeling completely alone in the world, when an American woman stopped and gave him her last $3. My eyes filled with tears. He said you told him not to be sad, that his mother wouldn't want him suffering. Those words, Margaret, they were the last kind thing anyone had said to him in years. In his world, kindness doesn't exist, only power and fear and money. You reminded him that there was still good in the world, so he paid my rent," I whispered. "Sent me money. He wanted to protect you," Grace said, "to repay your kindness. But Jin's world is dangerous, and his enemies are ruthless. When they found out about you, they saw an opportunity. They planned to kidnap you, use you as bait to draw Jin out." The room felt like it was spinning. This can't be real. This can't be my life. Grace reached over and took my hand. "I know this is overwhelming, but you're safe here. Jin made arrangements. This house is protected. He has people watching the neighborhood, making sure no one connected to his enemies can find you." "For how long?" I asked. "How long do I have to hide?" Grace's expression was sad. "I don't know. Jin is working on solving the problem, but these things, they take time. In the meantime, you live here. You have a room upstairs, meals included. There are other boarders, retired folks, a widow like yourself, a veteran, good people. You'll fit right in." "I don't want to fit in," I said, anger rising through my fear. "I want my life back." "I know," Grace said softly, "but sometimes the life we had is gone, and all we can do is build something new." Grace showed me to my room on the second floor. It was simple but clean. A single bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser, a small desk by the window that looked out onto a quiet street. It was nicer than my apartment in Chicago had been, which somehow made me feel worse. I didn't want nice. I wanted familiar. "Dinner is at 6, Grace said. "You don't have to join us tonight if you're not ready. I can bring you a tray." "Thank you," I managed. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself cry. Really cry. For the first time since that man had stopped me on the dark Chicago street. I cried for my old life, for my apartment, for the church bingo games and Mrs. Chen's terrible coffee. I cried for Robert, wishing desperately that he was still alive to tell me what to do. Most of all, I cried because I felt like a fool. A silly old woman who'd thought a simple act of kindness was just that, simple. But nothing in this world was simple, I was learning. Every action had consequences that rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict. I eventually fell asleep, exhausted, still wearing my clothes. When I woke, it was late afternoon. The room was dim with gray Seattle light. I could hear voices downstairs, the clatter of dishes, the smell of something cooking. Normal sounds of life going on. I unpacked my suitcase, hanging my few clothes in the closet, placing Robert's photograph on the dresser where I could see it. I washed my face in the small bathroom down the hall and tried to make myself presentable. At 6 o'clock, I went downstairs. The dining room held a long table set for 6. 4 people were already seated. Grace smiled when she saw me and gestured to an empty chair. "Everyone, this is Margaret. She'll be staying with us for a while. Margaret. This is Helen, Dorothy, Frank, and Arthur." Helen was a tiny woman in her 80s with bright eyes. Dorothy looked to be in her 60s, heavy-set with a kind face. Frank was a veteran in his 70s, his left arm missing below the elbow. Arthur was the youngest, maybe early 60s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Welcome," they said in various tones of friendliness. Dinner was pot roast with vegetables, simple and delicious. The conversation was easy, mostly about a television show I didn't watch and local news I knew nothing about. No one asked where I'd come from or why I was there. I appreciated that more than I could say. After dinner, I helped Grace clear the dishes. "Thank you for being kind to them," Grace said quietly. "They're all running from something too. This house is a sanctuary for people who need a second chance." "Did Jin help all of them?" Grace shook her head. "Just you. The others found me through different paths. But they're all here for the same reason. They needed somewhere safe to start over. Maybe, I thought, I could do that too." The first week in Seattle passed in a strange fog. I went through the motions of living, eating meals with the other boarders, taking short walks around the neighborhood, sitting in the small library reading books I couldn't concentrate on. But I didn't feel present. I felt like I was watching my life from outside my body, disconnected and numb. Grace was endlessly patient with me. She never pushed me to talk, never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. She just created a gentle routine that I could hold on to. Breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Between meals, I was free to do as I pleased. The other boarders slowly revealed their own stories. Helen had lost her husband and her home to medical debt. Dorothy was hiding from an abusive son who wanted to put her in a nursing home and take her savings. Frank had nowhere else to go after the VA housing program fell through. Arthur had been a college professor who'd lost everything in a scandal he wouldn't discuss. We were all refugees from our own lives, I realized, all hiding from something. The boarding house was our island in a storm. On my 8th day in Seattle, Grace came to my room after breakfast. "There's someone here to see you," she said. My heart stopped. "Who?" "Jin." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "He's here? In Seattle?" "He needs to talk to you. It's important." Grace's expression was serious. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to. I can send him away." Part of me wanted exactly that, to never see Jin Park again, to pretend none of this had ever happened. But another part of me, the part that had given him $3 in the first place, wanted answers. Needed them. "I'll see him," I said. Grace led me downstairs to a small parlor I hadn't been in before. Jin was standing by the window, looking out at the rainy street. He was wearing a dark suit, impeccably tailored, his hair perfectly styled. He looked powerful, untouchable, nothing like the grieving man who'd sat crying on a Chicago sidewalk. When he turned and saw me, something in his expression softened. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, bowing slightly. "Thank you for seeing me." "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Isn't it dangerous for you to be here?" "Very dangerous." he admitted. But I needed to speak with you face to face, to explain, to apologize. Apologize for what? For ruining my life? For making me run away from everything I know? He flinched at my words. Yes, for all of that. I never intended any of this to happen. I only wanted to repay your kindness. Well, you've done a wonderful job, I said bitterly. I've lost my home, my friends, my entire life because of your gratitude. I know, Jin said quietly. And I'm going to make it right. Make it right. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. How exactly do you plan to do that? Can you give me my life back? Can you erase the last 2 weeks? Jin moved away from the window, his movements careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. No, I can't undo what's been done, but I can tell you the truth, and I can offer you a choice. I'm listening. He gestured to a chair. Please, sit. This will take some time. I sat, my hands gripping the armrests, my body tense. Jin remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. My organization in Chicago is at war, he began. My rivals, the Chin family, they've been trying to take control of our territory for 2 years. It's been bloody, brutal, and costly on both sides. When they found out about you, about my payments to you, my protection of you, they saw an opportunity to use me as bait, I said. Yes. They planned to kidnap you, torture you, force me to watch or listen, and then demand I surrender my territory in exchange for your life. They knew I would do it. The casual way he said, torture you, made my blood run cold. Why would you do it? I asked. I'm nothing to you, just an old woman who gave you a few dollars. Jin's jaw tightened. You're not nothing, Mrs. Hayes. On the worst day of my life, when I was sitting on that curb questioning everything I'd become, you showed me kindness. Real, genuine kindness with no expectation of return. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Do you know what that meant to me? His voice had risen slightly, emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. My mother spent her last days begging me to leave the life I'd chosen, to become someone better. I promised her I would try, but after she died, I felt like it was too late. I was too deep, too stained by what I'd done. Then you came along and treated me like I was worth saving, like I was still human. Tears were streaming down my face. But I didn't know who you were. I just saw someone hurting. Exactly, Jin said. You saw me as a person, not as a monster. That's why I had to protect you. That's why I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if it costs me everything. He paused, looking directly into my eyes. The Chin family is still looking for you. My people have tracked their movements. They've sent soldiers to Seattle, searching. They know you're here somewhere. My stomach dropped. Then I'm not safe. I need to run again. No, Jin said firmly. I'm ending this. Tonight, I'm going to meet with the Chin family and negotiate peace. How? By giving them what they want, me. I stood up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. Are you insane? They'll kill you. Probably, Jin said with unsettling calmness. But that's the price for your safety, for ending this war before more innocent people get hurt. No, I said firmly. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. I can't have that on my conscience. Jin smiled, but it was sad. It's not your choice, Mrs. Hayes. This is my decision. I'm telling you because you deserve to know, and because I need you to understand something. He stepped closer, his expression intense. When my mother died, I lost my last connection to anything good in this world. I'd become exactly what she feared, a man defined by violence and power with no humanity left. You gave me back a piece of that humanity. For 2 months, I got to be someone's protector, someone's benefactor. I got to do something good, even if I did it with dirty money. His voice cracked slightly. This meeting tonight, this sacrifice, it's not just for you, it's for me. It's my chance to finally keep the promise I made to my mother, to be someone worth remembering as more than just a criminal. I was crying openly now. There has to be another way. You can't just give up your life. I'm not giving it up, Jin said. I'm trading it for something more valuable, for your peace, for ending a war that's killed too many people, for finally doing the right thing. Grace appeared in the doorway, her face somber. Jin, it's time. He nodded, then turned back to me. After tonight, You'll be able to go home to Chicago if you want, or stay here with Grace. The choice will be yours, and you'll be safe. I've made arrangements. The Chin family will have no reason to come after you once this is settled. Please, I begged, don't do this. Jin walked to me and took my hands in his. They were warm, strong, alive. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes, for those $3, for your kindness, for reminding me that I was still capable of being human. It was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. He released my hands and walked toward the door. Wait, I called out. What am I supposed to do? Just sit here while you go off to die. Jin paused in the doorway, looking back at me one last time. Live, Mrs. Hayes. Live the life you want, free from fear. That's all I ask. Make it worth it. Then he was gone, Grace following behind him, leaving me alone in the parlor with my tears and my guilt and a crushing sense of helplessness. I'd given a stranger $3 and told him not to be sad. Now he was going to die because of it, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop him. I stood in that parlor for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. My mind was racing, my heart pounding. I couldn't just accept this. I couldn't let Jin walk to his death because of me. I ran to the front door, but Grace was standing there, blocking my way. Let me pass, I said. I have to stop him. You can't, Grace said gently but firmly. He's already gone. And even if you caught him, he wouldn't change his mind. I've known Jin since he was a boy. When he decides something, that's final. Then we call the police, tell them about the meeting. Grace shook her head. And say what? That a mob boss is meeting with his rivals? The police can't help, Margaret. This is Jin's world, and he has to solve it his way. I sank down onto the stairs, my legs giving out. This is my fault. All of this. Grace sat beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders. No. This was Jin's choice, every step of the way. He chose the life he led. He chose to help you. He chose to end it this way. You were just kind to a stranger, that's all. But if you hadn't, Jin would still be the same man, living the same violent life, with no hope of redemption. You gave him something to care about beyond himself. That's a gift, not a curse. I wanted to believe her, but the guilt was crushing. We sat there on the stairs together as the evening darkened into night. The other boarders gave us space, sensing something serious was happening. I heard the grandfather clock in the hallway chime 8, then 9, then 10. What was happening out there? Was Jin alive? Dead? Was it already over? At 11:30, the phone rang. Grace jumped up and ran to answer it. I followed, my heart in my throat. She picked up the receiver, listened for a moment, then her eyes widened. Yes, she said. Yes, I understand. Thank you. She hung up and turned to me, her face pale. Jin is alive, she said. I nearly collapsed with relief. Thank God. What happened? I don't know the details. That was one of Jin's men. He said the meeting happened, there was violence, but Jin survived. He's injured but alive. Where is he? I don't know, they wouldn't say, but he sent a message for you. What message? Grace's eyes were shining with tears. He said, "Tell Mrs. Hayes she's free. The debt is paid. She can go home." I stood there, trying to process those words. Free. Home. It should have filled me with joy, but all I felt was a hollow ache. What did he give up? I whispered. What did it cost him? Everything. Grace said softly. Everything. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Jin, about what he'd sacrificed, about what everything meant. Had he given up his territory, his organization, his very identity as a powerful man? Morning came gray and cold. I went downstairs to find Grace already in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked as tired as I felt. Any more news? I asked. She shook her head. Nothing. But no news is good news in Jin's world. It means he's staying hidden while things settle. Over the next 3 days, fragments of information trickled in through phone calls Grace received. I pieced together what had happened at that meeting from the whispered conversations I overheard. Jin had gone to the meeting alone. No bodyguards. No weapons. A sign of surrender. The Chin family, led by an old man named Marcus Chin, had been ready to kill him on sight. But Jin had offered something they couldn't refuse. His entire territory in Chicago, all his operations, all his connections, in exchange for 3 guarantees. First, that I would never be touched. Second, that there would be peace between the families. No more war, no more bloodshed. Third, that Jin himself would be allowed to leave Chicago alive. Marcus Jin had accepted, but with conditions. Jin had to leave the city within 24 hours. He could never return. He could never rebuild his organization. If he tried to regain power anywhere in the United States, the deal was void and he would be hunted down. Jin had agreed to everything. He'd walked away from the life he'd built for 20 years, from the power and money and fear and respect, all to buy my safety. When Grace told me this, I broke down completely. He gave up everything for me. I sobbed. Everything. And for what? $3 and some kind words. For humanity, Grace said. For the chance to be someone his mother would be proud of. For redemption. Margaret, you can't put a price on that. On the 4th day after the meeting, a letter arrived for me. It was postmarked from Vancouver, Canada. No return address. Inside was a single page in Jin's careful handwriting. Dear Mrs. Hayes, by the time you read this, I will be far from the life I knew. I have nothing now except the clothes on my back and the memory of your kindness. But I am free in a way I haven't been since I was 16 years old. You asked me not to be sad when my mother died. I wasn't ready to hear that then. But I understand now what you meant. Grief is natural, but suffering is a choice. I chose to suffer for many years, punishing myself and others for things I couldn't change. You showed me there was another choice. To be kind. To be human. To care about something beyond myself. I don't know where I'm going or who I'll become, but whoever that person is, they will be better than who I was. Because of you. The letter continued. I've arranged for you to receive a monthly payment for the rest of your life. It's from legitimate sources, investments I made years ago under a different name, completely separate from my criminal activities. Please don't refuse it. Let me do this one last good thing. You can return to Chicago whenever you're ready. You're safe now. The Chin family has given their word, and in our world, that means something. No one will bother you, threaten you, or even mention my name near you. I want you to know that the 2 months I spent protecting you, helping you, were the happiest I've been since my mother died. I got to be someone's guardian angel instead of someone's nightmare. That meant more to me than all the power I had. Live well, Mrs. Hayes. Be happy. Find joy in small things. And if you ever think of me, don't remember me as the criminal I was. Remember me as the man who sat crying on a sidewalk and was saved by your kindness. With deepest gratitude, Jin Park. I read the letter 3 times, tears falling onto the paper, smudging some of the ink. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my purse, next to Robert's photograph. Grace was right. Jin had traded everything for redemption. And somehow, impossibly, he'd found it. 2 weeks later, I made my decision. I would return to Chicago. Grace understood. This is your home, she said. Your memories are there. You should go back. What about you? I asked. Will you be all right? I'll be fine, she said. I have the boarders to care for. And maybe, someday, Jin will come back and visit. Though I suspect he'll stay away for a long time. It's safer for everyone. The other boarders threw me a small goodbye party the night before I left. Helen gave me a scarf she'd knitted. Dorothy gave me a tin of homemade cookies. Frank and Arthur both hugged me and wished me well. You're always welcome back, Grace said as she drove me to the bus station. This will always be a safe place for you. Thank you, I said. For everything. The bus ride back to Chicago took the same 2.5 days, but this time I wasn't running. I was going home. The landscape that had seemed so frightening on the journey out now felt almost comforting on the return. When the bus pulled into Chicago station, I felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly knocked me over. The familiar buildings, the familiar sounds, even the familiar cold. It was all still here, waiting for me. I took a taxi back to my neighborhood. When we turned onto my street, I half expected to see it changed, different somehow. But it looked exactly the same, like I'd never left. The apartment building was still standing. My old apartment 3B was still mine. Grace had told me Jin had paid the rent for 5 years in advance before he left the city. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand on the familiar railing. When I reached the third floor, I stood outside my door for a long moment before putting the key in the lock. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. The chair I'd shoved under the door handle was still there. My teacup was still on the counter, long since dried. The calendar on the wall still showed February. I set down my suitcase and walked through the rooms, touching familiar objects, breathing in the faint smell of home. It felt both exactly right and completely wrong. I was the same person who'd lived here, but I was also completely different. That evening, I unpacked properly this time. I put Robert's photograph back on the mantle. I hung my clothes in the closet. I threw out the old food in the refrigerator and made a list of what I needed to buy. The next morning, I went to the grocery store, the same one where I'd first met Jin. I half expected to see him there, sitting on the curb, but of course he wasn't. He was hundreds of miles away, living under a new name, being someone new. Mrs. Chen called me that afternoon. "Margaret, you're back. We were so worried. Where did you go?" "I had to take care of some family business," I said vaguely, "but I'm home now." "Well, thank goodness. We missed you at bingo. Helen Chen, from the game, she hasn't won a single pot since you left. I think you were her good luck charm." I smiled. It was a different Helen, I thought. But it was nice to be missed. Over the next few weeks, I fell back into my old routines. Church on Sundays, bingo on Friday nights, grocery shopping on Tuesdays. But everything felt different now. I looked at people differently, wondering what burdens they carried, what secrets they held. The monthly payments Jin had mentioned started arriving, exactly $800 every month, deposited into a bank account that had been opened in my name. The paperwork showed it came from something called the Robert M. Trust. Jin must have used my late husband's name. It was thoughtful, ensuring no one would question where the money came from. With that security, I started volunteering at the church soup kitchen 3 times a week. If Jin could find redemption through kindness, maybe I could honor that by being kind to others. One day in April, I was serving lunch when a young woman came through the line. She looked exhausted, defeated, like life had beaten her down. I gave her an extra-large portion and smiled at her. "You take care of yourself," I said. "Things will get better." She looked up at me with surprised eyes, as if she'd forgotten people could be kind, and whispered, "Thank you." It was such a small thing, just a few words and a smile. But I remembered what small kindnesses could do, how they could ripple outward in ways you'd never expect. Maybe that young woman would remember this moment someday. Maybe it would matter to her the way that moment with Jin had mattered to him. Spring turned to summer, and I settled into my new normal. The fear that had consumed me in those early weeks faded to a distant memory. No one from Jin's world contacted me. No mysterious strangers appeared. I was, as he had promised, free. But I thought about him often, especially late at night, when the city was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts. I wondered where he was, what name he was using, what kind of life he was building. Was he happy? Had he found peace? I kept his letter in my nightstand drawer, next to my Bible. Sometimes I would take it out and read it again, reminded of the extraordinary thing that had happened to me. A simple act of kindness had changed 2 lives, mine and Jin's. It had cost me my sense of safety and routine, but it had given me something profound in return. The knowledge that small acts of goodness mattered more than I'd ever imagined. In July, something unexpected happened. I was at the grocery store, that same store where it all began, when I noticed a young Asian man watching me from across the parking lot. My heart jumped. For a moment, I thought it might be Jin, that he'd come back despite the danger. But as he walked closer, I saw he was too young, barely out of his teens. He approached me hesitantly. "Mrs. Hayes?" "Yes. My name is David Park. Jin was my cousin." He looked nervous, glancing around as if worried about being seen. "He asked me to check on you, to make sure you were doing okay." My eyes filled with tears. "He's all right then." "He's alive?" David nodded. "He's alive? I can't tell you where, but he's safe. He's different now, quieter. He works with his hands, building things. He said it helps him think. Does he seem happy?" David considered this. "I think he's at peace." "That's different than happy, maybe. But it's something. Please, I said. If you talk to him, tell him. Tell him I'm grateful. Tell him I'm okay. And tell him that what he did, giving up everything, it wasn't wasted. I think about it every day and it makes me want to be better. David smiled. I'll tell him. He'll like hearing that. He started to leave, then turned back. Mrs. Hayes, Jin told me what you did for him. Those $3 and your words. He said it saved his life in a way nothing else could have. Thank you for that. Our family. We needed someone to show him there was a way out. After he left, I sat in my car for a long time, crying. But they weren't sad tears. They were tears of gratitude, of closure, of understanding that sometimes the most important things we do in life are the smallest ones. We never know whose life we might touch, or how our kindness might ripple out into the world. That encounter with David Park gave me a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. Knowing Jin was alive, that he'd found some measure of contentment, made everything we'd both gone through feel worthwhile. I continued my routines through the summer and into fall. The church soup kitchen became increasingly important to me. I met so many people there, homeless veterans, single mothers struggling to make ends meet, elderly folks whose pensions weren't enough, young people who'd lost their way. Each person had a story, a history of choices and circumstances that had led them to that cafeteria line. And I tried to treat each one with the dignity and kindness I'd shown Jin that day. One woman, Sarah, became a regular face I looked forward to seeing. She was in her 40s, with haunted eyes and hands that shook. She'd lost her job, then her apartment, then her children to the foster system. She was trying to get clean from drugs, trying to rebuild her life, but it was so hard. I don't know why you're always so nice to me, she said one day. I'm just a junkie, a failure. You're a person, I told her firmly. A person who's struggling, yes, but still a person worthy of kindness and respect. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you different. She started crying right there in the serving line, and I came around and hugged her, not caring about the rules against getting too involved with the people we served. 6 months later, Sarah came back to the soup kitchen, but this time she wasn't in line. She was volunteering, just like me. She'd gotten into a recovery program, found a job, and was working to get her kids back. She said my words that day had stayed with her, had given her hope when she had none. You reminded me I was still human, she told me, that I still mattered. I thought about Jin saying the same thing to me, how kindness had reminded him of his humanity. This is how it works, I realized. Kindness creates more kindness. One person's compassion ripples outward, touching others, who then touch others, on and on like waves spreading across water. On the anniversary of the day I'd met Jin, November 15th, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I took 3 $1 bills and went to the grocery store where it all began. I sat on the same curb where Jin had sat, and I waited. After about an hour, a young Latino man walked past talking to himself, clearly distressed. He sat down about 10 feet away from me, his head in his hands. I stood up and walked over to him. "Excuse me," I said. "Are you all right?" He looked up, startled. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears. "I just lost my job," he said. "I have 3 kids at home and rent due next week. I don't know what I'm going to do." I held out the $3 bills. "Here," I said. "Get yourself something warm to drink, and don't be sad. Tomorrow is a new day." The young man stared at the money, then at me. "I can't take this from you, Senora. You probably need it more than me." "I don't need it," I said truthfully. "But maybe you do. Not for the money itself, but for what it represents. Someone caring, someone noticing you're hurting." He took the bills with shaking hands. "Thank you," he whispered. "You don't know how much this means." "Maybe I do," I said, smiling. "Take care of yourself and those kids. You'll get through this." I walked away feeling lighter than I had in months. I'd come full circle, I realized, from being the one who gave to being the one who received, and back to giving again. The cycle of kindness completing itself. As I walked home, I thought about all the things I'd learned over the past year. That kindness is never wasted, even when it seems to create complications. That redemption is possible for anyone, no matter how far they've fallen. That the smallest gestures can have the biggest impacts. I'd also learned that safety and comfort aren't the same as living. I'd been so comfortable in my little routine before Jin entered my life, but I hadn't been truly living. I'd been existing, going through the motions, waiting for time to pass. Now, even though my life looked similar from the outside, same apartment, same neighborhood, same routines, I was different inside, more aware, more present, more purposeful. That winter, I started something new. I began writing down stories from the people I met at the soup kitchen. With their permission, I documented their struggles and their hopes, their failures and their triumphs. I wanted to preserve their humanity, to show that everyone had a story worth telling. Mrs. Chen from Bingo helped me type them up on her old typewriter. We compiled them into a simple booklet and left copies at the church for people to read. We called it Voices of Hope. The response was overwhelming. People who had never set foot in the soup kitchen started showing up to volunteer after reading the stories. Donations increased. More importantly, the people whose stories we'd told felt seen, validated, valued. One story I never included was Jin's. That was private, sacred even. But his influence was on every page, in every act of compassion I documented. In March, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a wooden box, beautifully crafted, with intricate designs carved into the lid. There was a note inside. Mrs. Hayes, I made this with my own hands. It's the first thing I've built that wasn't destroyed by violence. I thought you might like it. I heard about your project at the soup kitchen. My cousin told me. You're still spreading kindness, still changing lives. Thank you for showing me that was possible. I'm at peace now. I hope you are too. Jay. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the care that had gone into every curve and line. I kept the wooden box on my mantle, next to Robert's photograph. It became a conversation piece when people visited. They'd ask about it, admire the craftsmanship, and I'd simply say it was a gift from someone whose life I'd touched. That spring, something wonderful happened at the soup kitchen. Sarah, the woman who'd been homeless and struggling with addiction, announced that she'd gotten her children back. She brought them to meet me, 2 boys and a girl, ages 6 to 12, all with their mother's eyes. This is the lady I told you about, Sarah said to them. The one who reminded me I was still a person worth saving. The oldest boy, Marcus, looked at me seriously. Thank you for helping my mom. We missed her a lot. I hugged all 3 of them, tears streaming down my face. This, I thought, is what it's all about. Not the big dramatic sacrifices, but the quiet moments of connection that help people find their way back to themselves. In May, I turned 70. The people at the soup kitchen threw me a surprise party. Nothing fancy, just cake and coffee and people who'd become like family. They'd all chipped in to buy me a gift, a beautiful journal with my name embossed on the cover. For more stories, they said. Keep writing them down. Keep telling people they matter. That summer, David Park came to see me again. He looked more confident this time, less nervous about being spotted. Jin wanted me to give you something, he said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed Jin standing in front of a small house, surrounded by trees. He was wearing simple clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, and he was smiling. Really smiling. Not the controlled expression I'd seen in Chicago, but genuine happiness. He built that house himself, David said. Took him almost a year, but he did it. He works as a carpenter now, builds furniture and cabinets for people in his town. He says working with his hands helps him stay grounded. He looks good, I said, studying the photo. Peaceful. He is. He told me to tell you that everything he is now, he owes to you. That $3 and your kindness gave him permission to become someone new. It wasn't just me, I said. He made the choice. He did the hard work of changing. Maybe, David said, but you showed him it was possible. That's worth everything. After David left, I added the photograph to my small collection of treasures. Robert's picture, my mother's pearls, and now this image of Jin in his new life. I thought about the different kinds of wealth a person could have. Money, certainly. Power. Security. But the real wealth, I'd learned, was in connections. In knowing you'd made a difference. In having touched someone's life and been touched by theirs in return. By that measure, I was the richest woman in Chicago. As summer faded into autumn, I noticed I was getting tired more easily. Simple tasks that used to be effortless, walking to the store, climbing the stairs to my apartment, left me winded. I ignored it at first, attributing it to age. I was 70 SARS after all. Some slowing down was natural, but in October, I collapsed at the soup kitchen while serving lunch. I woke up in the hospital with Mrs. Chen sitting beside my bed, her face creased with worry. "You gave us quite a scare," she said. The doctor came in shortly after, a young woman with kind eyes and a serious expression. "Mrs. Hayes, I need to be honest with you. Your heart is failing. You've had significant damage, likely from years of untreated high blood pressure. We can manage it with medication, but I don't have years left." I finished for her. She nodded. "Maybe months. Maybe a year if we're lucky." "I'm sorry." I felt surprisingly calm. I'd lived a long life. I'd loved and been loved. I'd made a difference, however small. If it was my time, I could accept that. "Thank you for being honest," I told her. They kept me in the hospital for 3 days, adjusting medications, running tests. When they finally released me, I went home to my apartment and sat in the quiet, thinking about what I wanted to do with whatever time I had left. I decided I wouldn't waste it on fear or regret. I kept volunteering at the soup kitchen, though I had to take more breaks now. I kept writing down stories, though my handwriting was shakier than before. I kept living each day as fully as I could. In November, on the 2nd anniversary of meeting Jin, I received another package. This one contained a beautiful wooden frame, clearly handmade, with the photograph of Jin and his house already mounted inside it. There was a note. "Mrs. Hayes, my cousin told me about your health. I'm sorry. I wish I could do something, but some things are beyond anyone's power to fix. I want you to know that because of you, I've lived more truly in these past 2 years than in all the years before. You taught me that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. When my time comes, I'll face it with peace because of the second chance you gave me. I hope you can face yours with the same peace, knowing how many lives you've touched. Thank you for everything. Jin." I hung the framed photograph on my wall, where I could see it every day. It reminded me that life wasn't about how long you lived, but about how much love you gave and received. That thought comforted me as the days grew shorter and colder. As my body grew weaker and my breath came harder, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. December arrived with its usual Chicago bite. I celebrated Christmas quietly, attending midnight mass at my church and sharing a simple meal with Mrs. Chen and some of the other folks from Bingo. They all knew about my condition by then. News travels fast in a close community, and they treated me with gentle care, as if I might break. But I didn't feel fragile. I felt strangely strong, as if knowing my time was limited had given me a kind of clarity. I spent my days tying up loose ends. I updated my will. What little I had would go to the soup kitchen. I wrote letters to people who'd mattered to me over the years, telling them how much their friendship had meant. I organized my small collection of treasures so whoever cleaned out my apartment after I was gone would understand their significance. And I finished compiling the stories from the soup kitchen. Mrs. Chen helped me make copies of the final volume of Voices of Hope. We'd collected nearly 50 stories by then, each one a testament to human resilience and the power of compassion. On Christmas Eve, Sarah came to visit with her children. They'd brought me a present, a scarf the kids had picked out themselves, bright red with snowflakes on it. "We wanted to give you something," Sarah said, "because you gave us everything. You gave us our family back." The children hugged me, and I held them close, breathing in their youth and energy and hope. This is what immortality looks like, I thought. Not living forever yourself, but living on in the people you've helped, the lives you've touched. After they left, I sat alone in my apartment, the Christmas lights from neighboring buildings twinkling through my window. I thought about all the Christmases I'd shared with Robert, all the years we'd had together. I missed him still, but the ache had softened into a gentle sadness. I wondered if Jin was celebrating Christmas wherever he was. If he had friends, a community, people who cared about him. I hoped so. In January, my health took a sharp turn. I ended up back in the hospital, this time in much worse shape. The doctors were honest. I had days, maybe a week. I asked them to contact Grace Kim in Seattle. She deserved to know, and I wanted to thank her one last time for taking me in when I needed safety. Grace came 2 days later, taking a red-eye flight from Seattle. She sat beside my hospital bed, holding my hand. "You look peaceful," she said. I am, I told her. I've made my peace with this. Jin will be heartbroken when he hears. Tell him not to be sad, I said, smiling at the echo of the words I'd spoken to him 2 years ago. Tell him I'm grateful for everything. Tell him he gave my last years meaning and purpose. Tell him to keep building things, keep being the good man he's become. Grace was crying, but she nodded. I'll tell him. That night, as I lay in the hospital bed drifting in and out of consciousness, I had the strangest dream. I was back on that Chicago sidewalk, outside the grocery store, and Jin was there crying. But this time, when I gave him the $3, he looked up and smiled. I know who you are, he said in the dream. You're an angel. No, I told him. I'm just a person, just like you. Exactly, he said. That's what makes it matter. I woke to find Grace still sitting beside me, her head resting on the edge of the bed, asleep. The sun was rising, painting the hospital room in soft gold light. I felt surprisingly clear-headed, as if I'd crossed some threshold in the night. The pain that had been my constant companion was dulled, distant. Grace stirred and opened her eyes. Margaret, how are you feeling? I'm ready, I said simply. She understood. She always did. She called the nurses, who made me comfortable, and then she sat with me, holding my hand. Do you have any regrets? She asked softly. I thought about that. Did I regret giving Jin those $3? Did I regret the chaos it brought into my peaceful life, the fear, the running, the upheaval? No, I said. I don't regret any of it. I learned more in these past 2 years than in all the years before. I learned that kindness matters more than safety. That connection matters more than comfort. That a life lived fully, even if it's complicated, is better than a life lived cautiously. Grace smiled through her tears. Jin was right about you. You are extraordinary. I'm ordinary, I corrected. That's the point. Any ordinary person can change a life with a simple act of kindness. You don't have to be special. You just have to pay attention and care. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. Will you do something for me? I asked. Anything. Tell the people at the soup kitchen that their stories mattered. Tell them they mattered. And tell them to keep being kind to each other. Keep seeing each other's humanity. I will. And Grace, thank you. For taking me in, for keeping me safe, for being Jin's conscience and his connection to goodness. You've touched more lives than you know. She was crying openly now. Thank you for trusting us, for seeing past what Jin had become to who he could be. I felt my eyes growing heavy. The room seemed to be filling with light, soft and warm and welcoming. I think it's time, I whispered. Grace squeezed my hand. It's okay. You can rest now. You've earned your rest. The last thing I remembered was the feeling of her hand in mine, and a sense of profound peace settling over me like a blanket. I had lived. I had loved. I had mattered. That was enough. They held my funeral at the church where I'd volunteered, where I'd served soup and listened to stories and tried to make people feel seen. I wouldn't know this until later, of course, but the church was packed. Mrs. Chen was there with the bingo ladies. Sarah was there with her children. The people whose stories I'd documented came, along with the other volunteers from the soup kitchen. People I'd helped over the years, people I barely remembered, came to pay their respects. Grace gave the eulogy. She talked about my kindness, my strength, my ability to see the best in people even when they couldn't see it themselves. She told the story of the $3, though she didn't mention Jin by name, just that I'd helped a stranger in grief and it had changed both our lives. What no one at the funeral knew was that in the back pew, wearing a simple black suit and dark glasses, sat a Korean man in his mid-30s. He'd flown in from Vancouver under an assumed name, taking a tremendous risk to be there. Jin had come to say goodbye. He sat through the entire service, silent and still. When it ended and people began to file out, he remained seated, waiting until the church was empty except for him and the casket at the front. Finally, he stood and walked down the aisle. He stood before my casket for a long time, his head bowed. Thank you, he whispered, for seeing me when I was invisible, for treating me like I mattered when I'd forgotten how to matter, for giving me permission to become someone new. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 $1 bills, old ones, worn soft with age. The same 3 bills I'd given him 2 years ago. He'd kept them all this time. He placed them gently on top of my casket. "I'm giving these back to you," he said quietly. "They did their job. They changed everything. Now I'm going to do what you did. I'm going to give them to someone who needs to know they matter." He stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked out of the church. No one stopped him. No one recognized him. He vanished back into his new life, carrying with him the lesson I'd taught him. Later that day, Grace went through my apartment to collect my belongings. She found the wooden box Jin had made, the framed photograph of him in front of his house, and the letters I'd written to people over the years. She also found my journal, where I'd written my own story, the full story of what happened with Jin Park, from that first meeting on the sidewalk to the moment I fled Chicago to my eventual return. She read it all, tears streaming down her face, and she made a decision. She would share this story. Not right away. It was still too dangerous for Jin. But someday, when enough time had passed, when the world had moved on, she would make sure people knew about the extraordinary thing that had happened when an ordinary woman showed kindness to a stranger. 5 years passed. Jin Park, or rather, James Chen, as he now called himself, had built a life in a small town in British Columbia. He ran a successful carpentry business, was known in the community as a quiet, skilled craftsman who did beautiful work. He had a small house he'd built himself, a garden where he grew vegetables, and a reputation for kindness that would have astonished anyone who'd known him in his Chicago days. He never forgot Margaret Hayes. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, he would take 3 $1 bills, the ones she'd given him, which he'd retrieved from her casket after the funeral, and he would give them to someone who looked like they needed kindness. A young mother crying in a park, an old man sitting alone on a bench, a teenager who looked lost and scared. He would approach them, offer the money along with a few kind words, and walk away. Some tried to refuse. Some took it gratefully. All of them remembered. He'd learned the lesson Margaret taught him. Kindness ripples outward in ways you can't predict or control. All you can do is cast the stone and watch the waves spread. Grace eventually shared Margaret's story, just as she'd planned. She wrote it down carefully, changing names to protect Jin's identity, and submitted it to a small magazine that published human interest stories. It was picked up by a larger publication. Then another. Within months, and the $3 Angel had been read by thousands of people. It inspired a movement. People started carrying $3 bills specifically to give to strangers who looked like they needed kindness. The Korean Mafia in Chicago had long since fractured. The Chin family still controlled the territory, but without the war between them and Jin's organization, things had settled into an uneasy peace. Most people had forgotten about Jin Park entirely. He was just another name from the past, another mobster who'd disappeared into witness protection or died in some gang dispute. No one was looking for him anymore. David Park, Jin's cousin, became a social worker. Inspired by his cousin's transformation, he dedicated his life to helping young people avoid the paths that Jin had taken. He often told them about his cousin's redemption, about how one person's kindness had saved a man's soul. Sarah, the woman I'd helped at the soup kitchen, eventually went back to school and became a counselor for people struggling with addiction. She kept a copy of Voices of Hope, the collection of stories I'd compiled, in her office, and she'd read from it to her clients when they needed hope. "The woman who made this," she'd tell them, "she saved my life by reminding me I was human. Now I'm going to do the same for you." Mrs. Chen and the bingo ladies kept my memory alive in the neighborhood. They'd tell stories about me to anyone who'd listen, about my kindness, my strength, my unwavering belief that everyone deserved compassion. The soup kitchen put up a plaque in my honor. Margaret Hayes, she saw everyone's humanity. 10 years after my death, Jin received a letter from Grace. She was getting older herself, in her 70s now, and she wanted to make sure he knew something before she passed. She'd established a scholarship in my name at the University of Chicago. It was funded by the money I'd left to the soup kitchen, along with contributions from the many people whose lives I'd touched. The scholarship was for students who demonstrated commitment to community service and compassion. Margaret would have loved this, Grace wrote. She believed in helping people help others. This scholarship will do that for generations. Jin added his own contribution to the scholarship fund, a substantial one, drawn from the legitimate investments he'd made years ago. He did it anonymously, of course, but Grace knew it was him. The first recipient of the Margaret Hayes Scholarship was Sarah's oldest son, Marcus. He was studying social work, inspired by his mother's recovery and the stories he'd heard about the woman who'd helped make it possible. When Marcus gave his acceptance speech, he talked about me, about how I'd seen his mother's humanity when she couldn't see it herself, about how that single act of kindness had rippled through his entire family. "I never met Mrs. Hayes," he said, "but she changed my life anyway." That's the power of compassion. It doesn't end with one person. It spreads and grows and touches people you'll never meet. Jin watched the speech on a video David sent him. He sat in his small Canadian house, in the life he'd built from nothing, and he cried. Not the desperate, lost tears he'd shed on that Chicago sidewalk, but tears of gratitude and peace. He'd kept his promise to his mother. He'd become someone she could be proud of, and it had all started with $3 and a stranger's kindness. That night, Jin wrote a letter he knew he'd never send. It was addressed to me, wherever I was now. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, I'm 50 years old now. I've lived as James Chen longer than I lived as Jin Park. I'm no longer the man who ran a criminal empire. I'm a carpenter. I'm a neighbor. I'm a friend. I'm someone who tries to be kind. Every day, I try to honor what you taught me. I look for opportunities to help others, to show compassion, to remind people they matter. It's not always easy. Sometimes I fail, but I keep trying, because you showed me it was possible to change. I hope wherever you are, you can see what came from those $3. You saved one man's soul, but through that, you've touched hundreds of lives. Thousands. Maybe. Through the story of what happened between us. Thank you doesn't seem like enough, but it's all I have. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for caring. Thank you for showing me that redemption was possible. With eternal gratitude, your friend, Jin." He folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box where he kept his most precious possessions, his mother's photograph, his citizenship papers, and the $3 I'd given him. 20 years after my death, the world had changed in ways I never could have imagined. But some things remained constant. The need for kindness, the power of compassion, the importance of seeing each other's humanity. The soup kitchen where I'd volunteered still operated, now called the Margaret Hayes Community Center. It had expanded to offer job training, addiction counseling, and housing assistance. Sarah ran it, with Marcus as her assistant director. Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep at age 85. In her will, she left instructions for my full story to be published, including Jin's real name and the truth about what had happened. Enough time had passed, she believed, that it was safe. The story was published in a major newspaper, then picked up by magazines and websites around the world. The Mobster and the Angel, a true story of redemption, became one of the most read articles of the year. Some people were skeptical. Some called it too good to be true. But the people who'd known me, Mrs. Chen, Sarah, the soup kitchen volunteers, they all confirmed it was real. The receipts for the rent payments were real. The scholarship was real. The impact on their lives was real. Jin, now in his 60s and still living as James Chen in Canada, was confronted by reporters who'd tracked him down. He could have denied it, could have hidden behind his assumed identity. Instead, he told them the truth. "Everything in that article is true," he said. "Margaret Hayes saved my life with $3 and a few kind words. I spent 2 decades trying to become worthy of that gift. I'm still trying." He showed them the $3 bills, worn almost transparent now from being handled so many times. "Every year, I give these to someone who needs to know they matter. Then they give them back to me. And the next year, I give them away again." Those $3 have circulated between dozens of people over the years, carrying Mrs. Hayes' message of kindness forward. The interview went viral. People around the world were moved by the story of how a small act of compassion had transformed a criminal into a productive member of society. But for Jin, it wasn't about the publicity or the attention. It was about honoring the woman who'd seen his humanity when he'd lost sight of it himself. On the 20th anniversary of the day we met, Jin did something he'd never done before. He traveled to Chicago, carefully, using his legal identity, with no intention of reclaiming any part of his old life. He visited my grave in the quiet cemetery where I'd been buried next to Robert. He placed a bouquet of flowers on the headstone, along with 3 $1 bills weighted down with a smooth stone he'd carved with the words, "Your kindness lives on." He stood there for a long time, remembering. "You told me not to be sad," he said quietly. "You were right. There's no room for sadness when there's so much gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Thank you for everything." He walked away from the cemetery with peace in his heart, ready to continue the work of spreading kindness, ready to keep building a life worthy of the gift I'd given him. And somewhere, I like to think, I was watching and smiling, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Not the grand gestures or the dramatic sacrifices, but the small moments of connection that remind us we're all human, we all matter, and we all have the power to change someone's life with a little kindness. Today, I understand something profound. We never know how our smallest acts of kindness will ripple through time. A few dollars, a gentle word, a moment of compassion. These simple things can change everything. Margaret Hayes gave $3 to a stranger and saved a man's soul. But more than that, she taught him, and through him countless others, that redemption is always possible, that kindness is never wasted, and that we all have the power to see each other's humanity, even in our darkest moments. Her legacy wasn't money or fame or power. It was love, multiplied through the lives she touched, spreading outward like waves across an endless ocean. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift any of us can leave behind.